Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Gevalt, and I'm here with Ria Patel. We're both from DeCODE. We work on DeCODE's government business. So today we're going to talk about how to build a BS detector. So when you're talking to tech companies, trying to figure out if they are a match for your use cases and you want to bring tech in the door, how do you know that the company is not vaporware or that they're actually doing what they claim they can do? So first, real quickly about what DeCODE is and how we fit into this ecosystem and how we work with AFWERX. So our overarching mission here at DeCODE is to connect tech with government. So to get better emerging tech in government, we look at it across the ecosystem. So we view ourselves as having three partners, if you want to look at it that way, or three communities is a better way to look at it. Government, tech, and partners. So on the government side, which is what Ria and I do, our job is to engage with government to help them connect with that emerging tech. So we do that a number of ways. We run a training program specifically for government on how to find and contract with emerging startup, non-traditional, whatever you want to call them, companies. And then we also sort of work with government through the whole innovation life cycle. So from how do you actually describe your problems and your requirements? How do you translate those problems for the private sector to actually attract the right technology? How do you work with your stakeholders inside your organization to make sure when you find that tech, you can get it in the door? So we work on all those sort of aspects for government. On the tech side, we run a federally focused accelerator program. So about 5 times a year, we run between 6 and 9 companies through a 3-month program where we teach them about federal contracting, marketing, use cases, pricing, all the sorts of things that these companies need to know to not get sideways with the government. And the thesis there is that if you're an emerging or startup tech company, you're venture backed, you have to make money, right? It's easier for you to sell 10x in the private market in the amount of time it takes you to get one government contract. So what we try to do is de-risk the federal market for these companies so that they're more likely to engage with government. And then the third community that we work with is partners. And this would be, think some of the big federal systems integrators. So the other key piece here, they provide the services around the technologies that these emerging tech companies provide. So that's sort of what DeCODE does. But onto the BS detector. So the way that we look at it here, and this derives, our experience with this is derived specifically out of our Accelerator program. So we work with venture capital every day to take a look at their portfolio companies, and then we also get direct applications into our program to come into our program. So we're looking at companies all day, every day to vet them for the federal market. So that's where sort of all this information comes from. So when you're doing this kind of commercial due diligence, there's 3 different buckets that you should be thinking through when you're trying to figure out, will this tech work in government? And so here we're just going to flag and talk through the technology, the people, and the financials. So for understanding the people, there's a lot of resources that you can take a look at for this. Go to the company websites. Crunchbase is another good one. But who are the founders? Do they have any understanding of government? I know it's funny, whenever we're in meetings with government, they always want to attract the 17-year-olds who are doing the coding and, are on the cutting edge. But at the end of the day, unless there's a solid company around it to be able to service a customer like the government, then those companies aren't really going to make it, right? They're too risky. They don't have the commercial traction. So that's also where you get into prior connection to government. The companies that we work with, we call them dual use. So the way that we take a look at it is they need to have commercial traction. There needs to be a product in the market that they're selling that they can survive on. And then government is a great vertical for them. And so if they have experience in government, that's great because it means that they've lived the pain before. But I wouldn't necessarily say if they've never worked in government, it's a bad thing. But it's going to be more work for you in government to get them to a level of understanding. The culture divide, the language divide across these 2 communities is huge. So when you're taking a look at these companies and they've never worked with government before, that can be an okay thing if they have solid commercial traction, but just know there's going to be more work on the government end to get these companies up to speed. And that's sort of what we teach them in our Accelerator program is how to speak government, what sorts of things they need to know. Another big thing is location. I mean, we all know at this point that if it's Chinese or Russian or Ukrainian, it's going to be a problem. But there's also, you have to take a look at company structure. So Which founders are do the founders have foreign backing? Where are they from? That's just because if you want to get technology through the security process inside government, these are questions that your security officers are going to ask. So taking a look at this again on the front end, there's different risk profiles for different countries when security officers are looking at this sort of thing. So it's definitely something worth knowing, and as you're planning out where you want to go, you'll need to remember this so that you know what sort of roadblocks are going to get in the way. And so understanding the special government stuff.
Yeah, and one thing that I will flag in terms of, so you're going to want to look for where are the major headquarters, right? And does the company have any offices abroad? Where are they located in the US? One thing that a lot of people overlook when we're talking with software companies is where the development work is done. Mm-hmm. So just because a software company in particular is located in the US doesn't mean that their developers are US citizens. And so a lot of times what you're seeing is that the company is US based, and the C-suite is all US citizens, but then you have the core team of developers are located in Eastern Europe and are working from Eastern Europe. And so things like that are becoming more and more of a flag when working through the contracting process. And so it's important just for you to know that ahead of time, because otherwise things can get really stuck in the compliance process later. And something that I really appreciate that Rebecca says all the time on just the criticality of understanding a company's team and the people behind it is that, especially when you're working with tech companies and venture-backed companies in which they have a roadmap that spans 3 to 5 years, right? And you are interacting with them at one point in their roadmap, but their product is constantly pivoting. And so when you are looking at a company, you are looking at what their product is going to look like in 3 to 4 years as opposed to now. And the team is going to be hugely critical in getting that product shaped to what it's going to be in 3 to 5 years. And so the product is always going to change, but the team shouldn't. And that's why we really emphasize understanding the team and really vetting the people behind the company before you decide to work with a company. Understanding special government things, we like to just bring this up because a lot of government folks don't realize that this is publicly available data. And so you can see if a company is registered on SAM, which obviously every company that needs to work with government needs a SAM registration and a DUNS code and all of that fun stuff. And so you can look that up. Knowing if a company has set-asides and if obviously, it's really helpful to work with AFWERX and other innovation cells in terms of this third point here around whether or not they have awards with the SBIR office. We bring them up because it's a lot easier for you to go through the contracting process and for your contracting staff to go through the contracting process if one of the companies that you're working with has one of these small business set-asides, and typically it's a lot faster of paperwork you have to fill out. It will affect the kind of procurement that you can do with a company. So if you're working with an SBIR company, you don't have to even compete, right? And things like that can take what is traditionally like a 6 to 1 year time span, if you're lucky, to a really, really reduced timeline.
So on to the financials. This becomes important again on the culture divide. So Ria made a great point about looking at the team. And so when you're taking a look at the venture backing of a company, that directly correlates to their experience and their maturity as a company. So when Ria was mentioning earlier that you have to take a look at the team. So a lot of investors at the seed stage here, which I'll explain in a moment, they actually don't really pay attention too much to the product when they're deciding whether or not to invest, because they know the product is going to be changed and iterated on so many times. They're really focusing on the team. So that's where we get into how to judge product versus team when you get to company maturity stage. So when you're taking a look at a company's financials, and if you're looking at a venture-backed company, Crunchbase is another good website to take a look at for that. So the way that we look at this is you can see the risk category there. That gets directly to a company's maturity level and whether or not they have the revenue most likely in the commercial market. And the way that we look at things is that getting any government deal for a company, for a small company, is very risky because it takes the government a long time to close a deal. And so a company that's early on or at the seed stage there might not actually survive all of the processes that they have to go through to get a government contract. So when these companies are out trying to get money, so seed you can see is less than 2 million. So this is, think about this as a couple of people who have a good idea, they have the beginnings of a product, an MVP, and that they're out in the market, they're out to talking to venture capital to try to get some funding to say, I want to take this to market. That's really where you're at seed. So our accelerator program, for example, we are stage agnostic. We'll take companies across all of these. We do not have very many seed stage companies for exactly this reason, because they're still sort of developing the product. It's a higher risk play for the government. Once you get to a Series A, then there's usually between 2 and 15 million that they're getting in terms of venture backing. They probably have more commercial sales. There's a product out there, they're doing some marketing. They can take a look at the federal vertical and probably survive a contract with the government. And then when you get to a Series B through D, it's pretty low. They're actually pushing out into new markets. So that's sort of how we assess risk for government versus maturation of the company linked to how much venture capital they've received. One interesting thing to look at with the government, what we've seen is that DoD in particular will say, we want to attract these early stage companies because we want to get the most interesting new emerging tech out there. But then at the same time say that if a company has more than 50% VC backing, then they're not eligible for an SBIR. Well, the problem is by the time a product is mature enough, a company is mature enough to actually go federal, they probably have already given up that much equity in their company in order to survive and to get this sort of venture backing. So sometimes there is a disconnect between what the government says that they want versus the companies that can actually provide it to them. So definitely take a look at this when you're taking a look at companies, when you're doing the research on them online. See what series, how much money they have, what is their current valuation, and then also take a look at their existing customers. So if they're working for big banks or in highly regulated industries, then they're probably a pretty good they'll probably be a pretty good company for government to work with because they're used to working in an environment where they have a lot of bars to hit in order to get through a contracting process. Anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it all. I mean, I know it's a big win. I know that a lot of this information, it seems daunting to just like go on Google and look at all of this stuff. But I mean, the company websites, you'd be surprised by how much more they have on there than you'd think. And then as Rebecca said, Crunchbase is pretty helpful in finding just like high general overview of the round they've just raised, how much money they have. Occasionally you can get some more information on their current valuation and their existing customers and their future raises. But otherwise, and we're going to get to it in the resources section, there are a ton of people that you can reach out to, including AFWERX and other innovation cells to help you answer some of these questions. So you might not find all of this just out open in the internet. And that's why really Rebecca and I's job is a lot of answering these questions, right? Because a company is only going to tell you so much about their projected revenue and their runway, but hey, they have to tell accelerators that all the time. So definitely don't think that if you can't find it on the internet, you just won't ever be able to find it. There's a whole ecosystem that knows this information and can share so you make the appropriate decisions when working with companies.
Okay, so this is yours, technology and security.
Yeah, and so the last sort of big chunk, if you will, that we like to focus on is security and technology specific to federal, right? So what happens a lot of times is that government end users and customers don't ask enough questions before they like buy a license to the software on deployment model, compliance, if the product touches any government data. And as I'm sure some of you who've been, or all of you who have been trying to get a company, especially a software company on contract, the ATO process and the compliance process like shuts everything down. So knowing the answers before you decide to buy a license or before you work with a company ahead of time can really help you sort of plan out your strategy around how you're going to onboard them onto your system. So typically the questions that we like to ask our companies before we decide to extend them an invitation to join our accelerator is their deployment models. So can you install their software on premise or a private environment, or is it cloud native? And if it's cloud native, it's important to know, well, can they operate on a government cloud? So cloud environments that are already compliant to government systems and can make the ATO process a lot faster. If software, where is the source code developed? That's hugely important in terms of just supply chain security. And oftentimes we don't ask this enough. This is a very tough one to find out for free. And this is definitely where you want to reach out to accelerators, incubators, everyone in the ecosystem who has to know this before they make decisions about working with companies. And then things that you might see. So if this we see it all the time more in terms of the DevOps and cyber companies and software tools out there. Do they have any certifications from NIST, which is sort of the Institute for Standards and Technology in Government? Do they operate on their own SOC? That will be a little bit something that you see a little bit more rare, but it's still questions that you can ask. I particularly like asking these questions to companies because the answer typically tells you if they know their stuff, right? So even if the answer is no, which is totally fine. I mean, these are just nice logos and they look good when you're justifying to a contracting officer why you want to purchase this license. It's a really good way of vetting whether a company knows what they're talking about and whether they have the lingo and the language to last in the federal market. And then on the last one, if software with their product touch government data, what we're getting at here is, are you going to have to, is that company going to have to go through the ATO process, and will they need to be FedRAMPed? And those are two super painful processes. I mean, Rebecca and I could sit here and do an entire 3 hours on FedRAMP and the ATO process and things you should know before working with companies. But the important thing to know about FedRAMP is that a company or a software only needs to go through the FedRAMP process, which is basically like a giant gold emblem that a company can operate on government systems across the government. The product and the software needs to actually touch government data. So it actually needs to be ingesting government data, and that is what is making the product run. And if the company is sort of operating in a black box environment, or if they're not actually touching government data, then you don't need to be FedRAMPed. And there's it's a lot of myth busting there, and I'm happy to talk more about it or answer additional questions on the FedRAMP ATO stuff when we get to the Q&A section.
So how do you actually find these companies and do some market research? That's tricky, right? To Ria's earlier point, it's hard to just go out and Google what do you need, but the number of people that we've heard that they just say they go to Google and they find something from there and then just kind of run with it. It's obviously hard to do comparison when you're doing it that way. So always use sort of the tech people that you have on staff. What we have found over and over and over again in the government is that procurement officers are the ones who are out there trying to find the tech, but they are, cut off from the people who actually have the requirement and who know the tech. In today's day and age, with as technical as stuff is and how many different AI products there are out there, you really need to have a technical staff actually looking at it. You can't just depend on the procurement officers. It's just can't happen. Tap into the ecosystem. So there's a lot of places out there. There are, you've probably heard the term incubators and accelerators. So just a quick sort of explanation there. Incubator versus accelerator, it kind of gets back to what we were talking about before with the venture funding and at what stage and maturity a company is. So at an incubation level, think more seed stage, maybe early A, Series A round. Those are the people, again, who are out there with a product idea, but not a ton of commercial traction. Those are what incubators are used for. So they're incubating an idea and a product to build a business around it and then actually get it out into the marketplace. Whereas accelerators are actually, there's a product there and you're trying to accelerate in a particular market. So for DeCODE, we're specifically a federally focused accelerator. So a company has a product, we're pushing it, helping them push it into the federal market. But those accelerators and incubators, they do this work all day, every day, taking a look at companies, trying to assess them for specific markets. So call them. They'd be more than willing to help you in almost all cases. Venture capital, same kind of a thing. However, I will say here, it's now become pretty in vogue for government to just reach out directly to venture capital firms. And a lot of people are doing it in a not organized fashion, and you run the risk of looking like you're doing innovation theater or tech petting zoos or whatever you want to call it. But venture capital is doing this obviously all day, every day, but they are obviously financially motivated, right? So they're taking a look at companies that they think they can invest in at the right time to be able to make the most money in the end. And they're pushing those companies to get commercial traction as fast as they can to increase that valuation, so that then the companies exit. By exit, I mean they get bought out by somebody else, or they do an initial public offering and end up on the stock market. That's how venture is incentivized to go and make money. So they are venture capital will definitely know a company's financials. One of the things that we're working on here at DeCODE is to try to get better messaging to the VCs that who we work with to say, please stop telling your portfolio companies not to go to the government. And we are making some traction there, and we're definitely seeing some more VCs pop up that are willing to work with government and then actually have their portfolio companies coming into government. So that is a good way to go. Just make sure that you're doing it in some sort of organized fashion, so there's not, hundreds of people from the Air Force hitting Andreessen Horowitz, which does happen. The other place is obviously AFWERX. So there's a bunch of innovation hubs across the military. DeCODE works with all of them. So you have NavalX, you have AFWERX, you have Army Futures Command. Then DeCODE also works on the civilian side. So we see a broad innovation across government, and we see everybody struggling with the same problems. So if you're in some area of the government and you want to know what DHS is doing or vice versa, DeCODE can help with that, primarily because, again, we work across government on this innovation ecosystem. And then obviously we're gonna say you should always talk to us. We're doing the technical and commercial due diligence. We're doing the financial due diligence, and we very much understand, because we train government, on what the government needs from these companies to actually get the tech in the door. And so we can obviously be a resource for you as well. The last thing we sort of wanted to flag here is that, like I mentioned, we have our federally focused accelerator program, and so our companies are winning SBIR awards. So we can see these companies have all been vetted by us. They have either graduated from our accelerator program. We've had 96 companies go through around there. We're running an accelerator right now for 12 AI companies. So we are constantly vetting these companies. They all do a variety of things. So these are the ones who have won phase 1 awards and will be out there trying to get MOUs for the phase 2s. So happy to answer any questions about specifically what these companies do. They're ranged from application building, seeing whether or not your developers are any good, some geospatial visualizations, algorithm checks to make sure your algorithms are doing what you think that they're doing. Then there's the 2 different cybersecurity companies on here as well. So happy to answer any questions about the companies that you might want to link up with for phase 2s. And then also happy to answer questions. And I think our screen sharing is done. Now we have to figure out where we see the questions.
Really fun because we're a tech company, so we should probably know how to do this, right? Here we go. All right, any questions? Tori, there's a very high chance that there's user error here and we're not seeing them. Great. How does DeCODE select what companies to vet? That's a great question. So every year DeCODE sort of looks at the marketplace across federal, and a lot of it is driven by what we're also hearing from our network. So we get all the time of just like our government friends being like, oh, 5G is coming up, and I think we're going to be super, super interested in connecting with some companies who are in the 5G space. Might be interesting for you guys to do a 5G accelerator. And that is something that we'll take a look at. Really what we're trying to do is take all of these technology areas that are interesting to government and then seeing if there is a strong sort of commercial market and a strong set of companies in that commercial market that are ready and poised for the federal market. So it's a lot of just sort of matchmaking and making sure that the timing is correct. DeCODE always does an AI and data accelerator. We always do a cybersecurity accelerator. We always do we always do certain accelerators and always look for companies that are universally just going to help government regardless of the timing and the market. And then we always do a handful of accelerators and look for companies that are just interesting because of sort of shorter term where government is investing. So for instance, we did geospatial, space, blockchain, which surprise everyone, no one in government understands blockchain or is ready to use blockchain. So we never did one after that again. And then we just did a health IT one in December because there's some huge waves in really large health IT modernization right now.
Okay, any other questions?
We also put our emails on here so you can reach out whenever. And then if you go to our website, there's a lot more information on sort of what we do for government. But one of the things on here, if anyone is very stressed after listening to this presentation about the amount of diligence you might have to do before working with a company, we tech scout for government all the time, and we have an additional, I mean, we couldn't give you all our secrets. So we have an additional like 60 plus vetting criteria that we do with companies before accepting them into our accelerator. And so we're always happy to share a little bit more about how we do diligence, but then also if you are stressed and you have the budget to afford just having someone do some massive tech scouting, that is something that DeCODE does.
Let's see, have you had any phase two? Have you had any phase two winners from your accelerator?
Yes, I think we've had about 22 companies who have won phase twos. And we have surprisingly a couple of companies who have made it to the elusive phase threes, which is really, really difficult to do, but they've managed.
Yeah, we've had a couple. So HiveMapper, so a geospatial tool. They take in drone video and then allow you to easily annotate it, and it shows change detection. They were one of them. We're actually hosting a session in a half an hour with another phase two winner, which is a company called Stardog, and they do a knowledge graph. So they allow government to connect siloed data sets without actually having to share the silos, which is obviously a big problem in government. And so we're doing that one at 2:45. The company will be here along with an Air Force representative to talk through how they actually got to a phase two together. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Please feel free to reach out to me or Ria. I believe everybody will be sending out their emails, but they were also on the deck that we can share later. So thanks for spending the time with us, and hopefully we will see you again in half an hour with Stardog.